Hi, all. These are generally conversations between adults after the children have left the table. The language can be spicy and the subjects can get saucy. So if you're ready, this is the Southern Fork. Unscripted kitchen chats and also studio chats with some of the most interesting voices in the culinary South. I'm Stephanie Burt, a food and beverage writer who travels with her fork to write for a variety of publications, from magazines you might have on your coffee table to the website you love to visit for your favorite recipes. And I'm inviting you to come behind the scenes with me to get to know the people who make this Southern culinary landscape so special. I'm always hungry for the next bite, thirsty for that next sip, and ready for the next conversation. Let's dig in. Alabama native Scott Peacock is a James Beard Award-winning chef and one of the foremost authorities on American Southern cuisine. He might be best known for his work at Watershed restaurant in Decatur, Georgia, and his partnership with culinary icon Edna Lewis. But his recipes and writing have appeared in numerous publications as well, including the New York Times, Better Homes and Gardens, Gourmet, Food and Wine, and Bon Appetit. Although I was very aware of his reputation, it was through one of those recipes that I first personally encountered Scott, since I believe recipes well written by one and well executed by another often become a sort of strange collaborative alchemy. Soon we connected further over the familiarities of food, common friends, and special Southern locales. And one such place for Scott is Marion, Alabama, the heart of Alabama's Black Belt region, where he's opened the historic kitchens of Reverie Mansion for the Black Belt Biscuit Experience. These intimate small group workshops on the fine art of traditional Southern biscuit making are built on his celebrated biscuits that have been on the covers of Gourmet and Food and Wine, and which Food and Wine named one of their 40 best recipes ever published. But the class is as much meditation as it is method. I could think of no better baking and conversation partner to end this year's Southern Fork Summer Tour, and here he invites us deep beyond ingredients and techniques into the art of presence, the commitment to a creative path, and the power of passionate attention to detail. Welcome to the Southern Fork, Scott.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
I mean, it's a sincere pleasure to have the opportunity to say that to you. So I really, really appreciate you inviting me and also allowing me to come and visit you and spend so much time with you these last couple of days.
The pleasure is mine.
We have followed each other a little bit in some concentric circles, but it was really only the past few days that we got to know each other more.
That's right.
But I, of course, have known of you and your work for such a long time, and I had heard about the biscuit experience from numerous people, and I'm so thrilled, but didn't know what it would be until I experienced it myself. So I want to make sure that the conversation that we have does not usurp the magic of that, because I do think experience is the important word there. But I'd love to talk to you today in a little more of a philosophical way, because you are a philosopher behind the stove, and to really talk to you about going deep into a recipe such as biscuits instead of how many things can you cook, because you can cook it all. You've shown that, you've proven it, and those kinds of things. So will you start with why the biscuit attracted you creatively?
Oh, certainly. It's And I hope one day I'll understand it, but it definitely goes back to childhood. Absolutely goes back to childhood. And I grew up in the deepest part of Alabama, a good 4 hours from where I live now in Marion. And biscuit was it was a familiar presence. My mother was not a good biscuit maker. She finally, after so much ridicule from my father, gave up on trying to make biscuit herself and began using refrigerator canned biscuits, a brand I won't say, but everyone knows. And
I believe you call it a polyester biscuit.
Yeah, that was a polyester biscuit, but I had no idea at the time that it was a polyester biscuit. I was so enamored with this, golden calf, that I thought was really, magic. I do think biscuit is magic. So it was this fascination with trying to understand how that was done, never really finding out how that was done. There's a lot of mystique. I mean, biscuit is a mystical experience and a creation. So I had all of that wonder about it as a child. I tried to make it once, maybe when I was 8 or 10 years old. My mother, not a good biscuit maker to begin with, coaching me, and it was a soul-crushing failure, just really devastating. And people, when I was growing up, talked about biscuit. And there was a lot of biscuit making going on all around me. And my father's mother was considered a very good biscuit maker, although her biscuit was very, very different from the TV biscuit, from the polyester biscuit that I became enamored with.
Which I am totally stealing that term. Sorry. We've been sharing quotes back and forth.
And it was just understood. Everyone could make cornbread. Everyone made cornbread. And people all have very unique and specific and personal ways of making cornbread. But the general understanding that was often articulated was that a biscuit maker was born and that you had to have the touch, and you were born with the touch or you didn't. And maybe, through process you became better, but you were either born a biscuit maker or you weren't. I don't know that I really agree with that. I did for a long time. I attempted to make the world's best biscuit, out of Gourmet magazine in the 70s, and it was a soul-crushing failure. And I thought very sadly, well, I don't have the gift. And that was very painful for me. And so I didn't for a number of years. I just didn't even attempt. And then I had this very long college career, very unsuccessful college career. I ended up cooking like a lot of cooks. That's how they come to cooking in their college careers. And I was hired, very last minute to come and cook on a hunting plantation in Albany, Georgia. And the nice lady who called said, it's a hunting plantation, so you have to make biscuit. How are your biscuits? And it struck terror in my heart. And she gave me the recipe over the telephone and then later revealed it was the one off the back of a self-rising flour bag. And I went to the grocery store that afternoon and I bought the ingredients and came home and made a biscuit. And to my great surprise, it was successful. And I thought, oh, I do have the touch after all. And of course, then I was pretty fearless. I think I'm probably have much more, not trepidation. I don't have trepidation at all about biscuit making now, but I think it's probably easier then than it is now to make the biscuit that I'm trying to make. And I don't think I answered your question at all.
No, I think you did. You're still figuring out what attracts you to it.
Well, I am, but I mean, there are a lot of things that attract me to it. I mean, one is the democracy of it. That's very appealing to me, in multiple ways. The perceived democracy, what I believed was the democracy of it. The fact that that's ubiquitous, and yet I do think it's more and more difficult to find an authentic biscuit, whatever that actually is. And, I'm not sure what that really is. I guess when I say authentic biscuit, I would mean without chemicals and without, dough conditioners and preservatives and that sort of thing. I mean, a biscuit genuinely made by hand, but I don't know that the other's inauthentic either. So, and then I'm not the biscuit police. Also how quickly it's made. And then it's one of those things that if it was made in the home, tended to be made with repetition. And I'm fascinated by that and the way that things are honed consciously and unconsciously, the way it holds our imagination, how personal it is, like that no one can make anyone else's biscuit. How it expresses the maker and the literal touch of the cook more than anything else that I'm aware of. I mean, I'll just go so far and say there is nothing else that expresses the literal touch of the cook more than a biscuit made by hand.
Right.
Completely by hand, especially.
Can we talk a little bit about a little bit more about that body memory and about the hands in cooking, because my experience as a biscuit maker and a cook is that there is a moment, and I never notice it until it's past, right? But there is a moment where something moves from my brain into my body, and it now is a cell memory. We're hearing a lot these days about the body keeps the score and stuff, and we're thinking about that as trauma, but it also keeps positive things.
Yes, it does.
Like how the biscuit, my biscuit tucks into the corner of the pan, and I know too much squish and too little too far, and I don't know when that happened. So you mentioned yesterday during the experience that you don't time stuff, but you can feel it in your body.
Yes.
You also time sometimes.
I do. Well, I time tea because I don't want it to get bitter while I'm running my mouth. But biscuit, I don't. I mean, biscuit is so quickly made, which is one of the reasons, aside from being delicious, that's one of the reasons that it became so popular, that it was made with what we consider to be staple ingredients and made so quickly. So it's not like a yeast roll or something else where you have to plan hours or days in advance to pull it together. So it could be very quickly done. That's part of why the biscuit experience is tailored around that, is because it allows for this very organic conversation, meandering and wandering, and then you can produce something very quickly once you get to it. But yes, I am a great believer that the being knows things that the brain does not. Maybe the brain knows it too, but it's not as easily accessed for me. And I think I've always been that way, but I don't think I was able to understand it as much as I do now. And I still don't understand it very much at all now, but I'm much more aware of it, and I'm much more aware of being able to trust that in myself, because it has served me well.
Trusting yourself in the kitchen, I think, is vital. And you speak about having your own personal biscuit, and you demonstrate your personal biscuit and go through all the steps very slowly. But how do we learn to trust when we have found our biscuit?
Well, I mean, it depends on what you like. And the biscuit I make today is not the biscuit that I was making 5 years ago. And biscuit is a thing of nuance, and it's a thing that is constantly evolving, whether we realize it or not. I mean, if I trace back the different influences in what I'm doing today, I mean, it is quite an evolution. And in some ways it seems big to me, but then I recently saw some photographs of biscuits I made 20 or so years ago using commercial flour. And I thought things were so different. And I was actually very happy with the way they looked, that it was closer to what I would want to do today.
Right.
But it's personal, and it's all about noticing. The biscuit experience itself is an invitation to notice. The making of biscuit is an invitation to notice. The eating of biscuit is an invitation to notice. And it is very much about the being for me, in that I have a very meandering mind and a monkey brain. And I find that I can focus that the act of making biscuit, the repetition of it, something that is so familiar to me and yet is always new, is very grounding to me. And even when I'm with a group of people and trying to communicate things and demonstrate things, that the act of that is still a very grounding, centering experience. And then I find that carries over into the world outside the kitchen as well, in a way that I think that I'm very grateful for.
Right.
But you find it I think the most important thing is to stay calm, to not overreact to the way something good or bad went. I do think it's important if you're making adjustments, you make one adjustment. You don't change 3 things in one batch, because then you're not going to know which one necessarily made the difference. You accept that it's always going to be different. If I made 2 batches of biscuit using the very same ingredients that I measured precisely, back to back, they're not going to be the same. And that's part of the wonder of it. And the sooner you can accept, the sooner I was able to accept that, which took a very, very long time, and celebrate that instead of being frustrated by it.
Right. We get frustrated easily,
Of
it
course.
seems, in the kitchen, right? And I often have people respond to me and say, I just don't care about food like you do. I understand that you have a different way in the kitchen, and I can see you in the kitchen, or I can see you with people, but I'm hungry. I've been at work all day. I just need to cook and be to the table. And so like if it's an unknown, I don't like that.
Right.
So one of the things in your evolution is that you have been writing recipes throughout your career.
Yes.
Definitely with Miss Lewis, and for lots of other people, from Martha Stewart to Better Homes and Gardens. How do you bridge that gap between your personal meditation, your personal grounding, and then bringing that to a larger conversation?
To a recipe?
That which is an invitation to join you in your own way,
Very
right?
much, yes. So writing a recipe is about communicating the most essential to convey the information that I believe is important for success. And it's not necessarily writing the most, just like in cooking in a restaurant, it doesn't matter how the very best that you can do something. Everyone, the weakest link in a chain in a restaurant, has to be able to execute it at a consistent level so that it will be consistent and that people will be happy. The thing is about clear communication, sharing the important information, the things that make the big difference. And it's often a very small thing that makes the big difference, which I'm fascinated by that, to be honest. And just to be clear and encouraging. And I'm not
clear and encouraging.
Mhm.
Yes, yes. So people like Dory Greenspan, who I
Yes.
love her writing. She is always clear and encouraging in her recipes, but I
Yes.
hadn't really put that together until you said that.
Yes, because I think when you're writing a recipe, you need to really want people to be successful.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about showing off. It's not about showing how much you know. It's about trying to convey to one person, a cook, a friend, an individual, how to do this. And it's also about self-examination. That's one of the gifts of it, is that you have to look at how to articulate, even to notice what it is that you're doing. Because the thing is, a cook, a lot of times we do things, our skills evolve, our taste evolve and develop over time. And so often have to look back to realize, what are we even doing?
Right.
And there's so much standardized language out there. I mean, I was aware of that when I was much younger and first trying to write recipes. And it's easy to fall to that. Yeah,
Right.
I did. You mentioned Better Homes and Gardens, and I was very, very lucky to write with them for a number of years. And I was very lucky. I had a very good food editor there, Nancy Hopkins, who worked with me, to whom I'll always be grateful. And it was the going back and forth with the test kitchen, because they had very standardized language, and that was default language, and how to work to change that so that it was my voice, rather than just default language.
Yes, yes. And that's where we lose that connection. I'm grateful to have 350 episodes of this show, and I see it in a lot of ways as an oral history project that's just ongoing, but I also do oral history projects. And I often speak to people, usually off mic, about the idea of intention in cooking, and if that comes through in flavor or success. I mean, how would you even define that?
It absolutely does. I'm convinced of it. And it's in so many different ways. I mean, cooking for me, is emotional. That description of like knowing when that gut feeling, because it is primarily from deep, that impulse or those signals emerge. I think is where they resonate, is what I think. And the more you notice that, the stronger it becomes, the more easily you can access it and the more you can trust it. But I absolutely believe in the alchemy of cooking, of intention, of the care. It is a means of expression. For me, it was always a means of expression as a child, and my interest, being in the kitchen with the people that I loved so much and who were good to me. And to carry that out, I'm cooking because I love it and because I'm filled with wonder about it. And the opportunity to share that with other people is quite astonishing and nurturing and enriching. And it's a dialogue. As cooking is a dialogue too. You were in dialogue with the ingredients. And so for me, I'm very lucky to contemplate biscuit very often, which involves contemplating the experience of growing wheat, how fortunate I am to work with Anson Mills and the genius Glenn Roberts, who is the hero, who provides me with flours that were milled 2 days ago from strains of wheat that we probably would not have in production if not for him and his work, thinking of the individual farmers and individual plots and years that these grains were grown. That's very inspiring and deserves all the respect and regard. And that's a great approach to anything, frankly.
It is. Well, and that intention of taking something like a buttermilk biscuit and breaking it down to its parts, that's a very chef thing where the chef says, how can I make this element better? How can I learn about this element? But you also have to decide, like for you, it's been the flavor of the wheat. And so you said
that the aspects of that have been dramatic. Yes.
Dramatic. And you went to the source where you're growing it. And you said that changed your relationship to flour.
Completely.
Now, of course, that is a relationship. So we cannot define or explain that in 3 sentences. But can you give us one way that changed your relationship to flour?
Totally. I mean, an appreciation for how incredibly difficult it is to grow organic antique wheat, especially in the heat and humidity of the Alabama Black Belt. And for anyone who does that and does it successfully, and to start with 2 teaspoons of a very rare seed and to be able to turn that into 8 cups of seed for the following year. I have never yet been able to make biscuit from wheat that I grew because there was never enough, because you're saving everything to put back into the ground to hopefully have enough to produce crops enough to one day have flour milled from the grain that you grew.
Right.
And it's extraordinarily challenging. I mean, birds would be an obvious thing, but there were crop failures that I never anticipated and could have never imagined. And as a young boy growing up in Alabama, with an interest in cooking in the 60s and 70s and working in restaurants, you were always imagining worst case scenarios and looking for the emergency exit.
Right.
But I never saw that. But yes, just the appreciation of what 2 teaspoons of wheat seed can produce. You know, I get a lot, this is not flour, but this is honey. A lot of beekeepers come through here. I'm fascinated with anything sweet and honey in particular. And I do think that the Black Belt of Alabama produces some of the very best honey in the world. But I learned fairly recently what a lot of people already know, that it takes 12 bees their entire lifespan to produce 1 teaspoon of honey. And that just astonishes me, especially I think about how cavalier we can be about honey or ingredients in general.
And cavalier about flour, ingredients in general.
Totally, exactly.
So that's where it goes. It's not just an appreciation for the hard work, but that changes how you treat the food in a recipe.
Completely. And also so that there is a very finite quantity of this rare antique wheat in existence and that I get from Anson Mills. So if I run out or if I waste it, you know, it's not just running to the store and getting more. These things come from real places and from real people and real process. And we're grateful to have them. And often, you know, we're tasting flavors of wheat that most people haven't tasted in over 100 years. Mm-hmm. It's extraordinary to think about. And this, I hope this doesn't sound too corny, but I really think of it, what I try to do in all cooking, but especially with biscuit and flour, is to be in service to the ingredients and to the tradition, to try to get my own ego out of the way. You know, I do feel very much in service to it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. not ever really thought or contemplated being in service to the ingredient in just that way. But I think chefs do talk about that when they say nose to tail or respect the fish or, make stock from the bones. That is the evidence of that service of an ingredient.
And it's also, it's in service to the expression of the ingredient rather than the ego of the cook trying to inflict their idea of what this should be, but seeing what this really is and how to bring out the best in it. That's, for me, the interesting and exciting challenge rather than going in with a preconceived notion. And also just paying attention to that gut and making very small changes and noticing those changes for better or worse. And also it is mysterious because early on in the biscuit experience, before the pandemic especially, I think I was doing them well, but I had not yet figured out my stride and how many I could really do in a week and what it really was. And I was often quite frazzled. And I remember one day I made a batch of biscuit. It was with a new batch of flour, and I made them and I thought, I think these are good, but I could probably use just a little bit less buttermilk tomorrow. And I held that with me the day, and I went home and I was thinking that tomorrow when I make biscuit, I'm going to use just a tiny bit less buttermilk. On and on. I mean, I woke up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, and I thought, when you make biscuit tomorrow, use just a little bit less buttermilk. And I had that in my mind the whole way. And then when it came to the moment of actually pouring out, measuring the buttermilk, something in me said, no, keep going. And I used exact, I thought, amount that I had used the day before. And it was really one of the best batches of biscuits that I can remember making.
Wow.
So again, the mind knows things, but noticing those feelings, that tension, that dissonance, or that, I don't know, what is the opposite of dissonance? It's not harmony, I don't think. It's,
integration.
That's great. Yeah.
Integration is the opposite, I believe, of dissonance.
That's pretty great. I think for me, it's either it's the feeling of energy coming back at you, or flowing out. And flowing out is always the way to go.
Right.
In my experience.
Well, I have to ask, as a writer, removing the S from biscuits to biscuit changes the energy. To speak about the energy, it becomes a totem, a symbol, but also a named thing, not a group of things. I don't know, it just has a different connotation to that. Was that something that was very intentional, or?
Oh gosh, I'm not even certain. I do think it is something that crept into my language since being in the Black Belt, but I couldn't tell you exactly when or how, but maybe it is, and I do use both. I will say both, but something feels right to me about biscuit, referring to it.
Language is alchemy too.
Yes, it is.
Yes. So when you are here with the experience, I would love to continue this experience of speaking with you for a long time, and I hope that we have many more conversations. But I have to ask from a listener standpoint, why is it important to use these ingredients that are finite? Why is it important to not choose something just from a shelf? Not making a grand sweeping gesture, but from your creative space?
Well, it enriches your experience, your life. It is a privilege, and it is on some basis within reach to many, but it is a privilege. And also us using these sweets helps to ensure that these sweets will remain in cultivation, that they will be here. And
variety of flavor and biodiversity.
Yes.
Not only is flavor, great for brain and whatever, but biodiversity is super important at this juncture as well.
Indeed.
And so do you feel that after people experience this, that they change maybe their relationship to an ingredient?
Maybe. I mean, I think some people definitely do. I hear about that. A lot of people send pictures of their aunts and mills.
Glenn is like, thanks.
Yeah, of their bags of flour that arrive. And that's very exciting. Or they go out and they send me pictures of their Yellowware bowls that they found. And that, I don't think I'd even thought about that, but it's very satisfying to see that it's meaningful to them. And that's really what it comes down to me. I mean, for me, making biscuit, sharing that with people is a very meaningful experience. And at this point in my life, when I came to Marion, that was very clear to me that I wanted to have meaningful experience. I wanted to do meaningful things and share meaningful things. And this is one of the best ways that I have found so far. I do think some people do go forth and adopt some of the practices, and they send their photographs, and it's very, it's very gratifying. It's encouraging.
Your work seems to be more about philosophy.
Yeah, it's very much.
Than it is about practice, because you're saying build your own philosophy.
That's right.
About cooking, and your practice will flow out of you.
Exactly. My goal, the biscuit experience, and I think I've said this already, but I'll say it again, is an invitation to notice.
Yes.
The whole experience is an invitation to notice. Everything that is in the kitchen is chosen carefully from myself as much as other people. But I mean, it feeds me. It helps me. It helps me create a feeling and experience, but it also, it nurtures me visually.
Mm-hmm. And it is I noticed it yesterday. It is, the only comparison I have for it is a Zen garden, where everything is very intentional in that space, and everything was laid out and very organized and beautiful, but to enjoy visually before the act of cooking.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope so.
Yeah.
But we all experience everything differently. And so,
which I love.
Yes, I do too. And that is part of my job as offering this guided experience, is to notice what people are noticing, and to see if it's possible to have them notice something that maybe they wouldn't otherwise. And also because then I notice things that I wouldn't notice otherwise through their eyes. I mean, that's very, very interesting and very, very exciting. So it's a collaborative experience. It's totally a collaboration, and it's never the same. I say this, and I say it without, people get the experience that they bring.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a dialogue and a communication. And it's my absolute favorite thing I've ever done.
I love that. And you've done some amazing things. So, well, this is such a special conversation, but I'd still like to end it, however, with the magic picnic basket question, because I'm just personally really fascinated with what you're going to put in this basket, because I know people have asked to have some of your food be put in their basket. So I am grateful to have spent so much time with you. I am thrilled to have a multi-hour drive back to South Carolina so that I can quietly process some of this. But I'm especially excited to welcome you to the Southern Fork family of guests. And something I've reserved just for them is this magic picnic basket question. So with this picnic basket, instead of talking about a death row meal, because I do not want to connect death to cooking or food in any way, plus I don't believe in the death penalty, I would instead like to bring you a picnic basket full of things that bring you life. I can time travel. I can go back and ask anybody to make one more bite of something that you would love to taste one more time. I can source for you, and I can cook a little bit with trepidation for you, though. However, I am happy to put things in the basket that don't go together. It doesn't have to be a design picnic, though I feel that you are really good at that. So what are some of the things that I can put in for you?
Well, the thing that, and for some reason I've thought of this recently, I think about my great grandmother, Stuart, who was my mother's mother's stepmother, because my blood great grandmother had died when my grandmother's very young of tuberculosis. Very, very sad story. So Mother Stewart, Selma Stewart, was a wonderful cook. She was really the only person in our family with style. She had beautiful, beautiful taste and style. And my great grandfather had the means to support that style until he didn't. But wonderful taste and a real joy and wonder about life and sharing and cooking and the cultivation of beauty as something meaningful, not luxury. Among other things, she ran a Depression era tea room in Hartford, Alabama when I was during the Depression, way before I was born, before my mother was born. And that fueled my imagination so much as a child. So I've been thinking about her a lot lately, and I think it would be her picnic. I think that's actually what I would go with for the most part. When we would go to her house, she had beautiful, beautiful gardens, and there were these little secret gardens and soft, longer grass, and we would sit under, cahaba trees and have ice cream. As my sister said, it was the good ice cream. It wasn't the ice milk we had at our house.
Ice milk is never good.
And it was with silver and linens, which we also did not have at our house. But her picnics, I can remember picnics with her. She would have mayonnaise jars of iced tea, very sweet iced tea in large mayonnaise jars with blue lids, and fried chicken that was really superb and room temperature. I don't think it had been refrigerated ever. And she would make pineapple sandwiches, which I've not had in forever, and pimento cheese sandwiches. And she would cut them, into 2 triangles, and they were wrapped individually in wax paper. And then we would sometimes have homemade ice cream, which was very, very special always to have, to be churning ice cream that was soft from the churn. And she had beautiful butter cookies. And this would not go in the picnic, but she would do this thing that just fascinated me as a child and still does, I think, as I'm thinking of it now. When we would go to her house, just my sister and I for supper, dinner sometimes, they were store-bought yeast rolls, like, dinner rolls, brown and serve. And she would put them in a glass, like a pie plate, and with like a stick of butter. And she would slowly cook them, and she would rotate them and baste them. And they were golden crusty all over, and then very, very soft inside and just soaked in butter. And it was one of the most luxurious and extravagant things I ever witnessed in my childhood. And I've not had that in forever.
No child is ever going to very few children, I don't know all the children in the world, but very few would turn down a brown and serve roll from the bag.
Yeah.
I remember dreaming of that. So adding a stick of butter.
It was fancy. Oh yeah. And it was tended. It was attended to. I think it gave her real satisfaction to do that and to do it well and to be able to share it, and then our delight in it, which I think I would have not been able to understand any of that when I was younger, just how good it was, and that I didn't know anyone else who was doing that. So it seemed very personal as well,
Yes.
Yeah, she was a huge influence. I've realized at this point in my life, like how influenced I was by her in an awful lot of ways. And yeah, so that would be that. I would love to have some of Miss Lewis's Spritz cookies. I would love to have those. And cat's tongues. I could go through a long list of things, that she made. It'd be wonderful to have, especially with that ice cream. But
what is a cat's tongue?
Oh, it's a very, very thin wafer. I mean, I think the French call it langue de chat or something like that. I don't pretend to know any French, or certainly not be able to speak any French. But yeah, it's a thin wafer cookie. And it's light as, hummingbird's breath.
Well, cooking is very personal for you, and your acts of service are too. And this was an act of service for us today, speaking with me. So I sincerely appreciate it. If people want to learn more about Scott Peacock, Biscuit Experience here in Marion, Alabama, or a lot of other things that he has done throughout his illustrious career, you can go to thesouthernfork.com. I'm going to have links there as well as images so you can see the face behind the voice. If you like what you hear, this has been an amazing journey for me, and it's all documented in the archives. There are more than 350 episodes. Not all of them have great sound, but I'm still glad to have learned along the way in public with you. So thank you so much for taking the time with me.
It's a great, great honor.
Thank you. Until our next conversation.
You've been listening to The Southern Fork.
I can't wait to bring you more culinary conversations, but in the meantime, I have one question. Are you gonna eat all that?